Noche. Good evening. I thought that the seminar started at 7:30, so I think there was a miscommunication in my agenda. So, oh, sorry. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Well, anyways, good evening. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here. And the concept that we'll be discussing tonight is the economics of mutuality, and which is very much in line with my own thoughts on the path we should pursue collectively, where sustainability should be central in all decision making in the coming years, with a focus on broad-based long-term objectives instead of short-term gains. A few weeks ago, I addressed the business community in Aruba during an event where I shared my ideas on the direction I wish to steer the economy. In this regard, it is important to set out our collective economic thinking over time, and in doing so, realizing that one and the same community can take different stances over time. In the mid-80s, when the oil refinery stopped its operations, the economic direction that Aruba chose to develop tourism was quite obvious. There was a broad-based support for this choice, since the economy and society would benefit from this choice, and the environment allowed for this development at that time. The decision was balanced from the perspective of profit, people, and planet. Tourism is both a capital-intensive and a labor-intensive industry, and in practice, the development of this industry has translated into an active real estate market with a generally healthy labor market. But as tourism continued to grow, the alignment between economic prosperity, societal developments, and the environment faded away. And we knew that economic diversification was needed, but an alternative development path turned out not easy to be found. The data in the economic development of Aruba confirms that we have achieved a quantitative growth since 1986, which is often perceived as a long-term growth and development. However, materially, we have been experiencing a weakening GDP per capita denominated in real terms. At the same time, we have to be realistic that changing the economic formula for Aruba will not happen overnight. But for me, as Minister of Economic Affairs and Sustainable Development, it is obvious that continuing on this path in the long term is not an option, and changes have to be made. However, unlike in the past, there are now no obvious choices to make the development of the economy. In particular, it is possible that short-term sacrifices have to be made in favor of long-term goals. And this is a new circumstance for the Aruban community, a circumstance which will take the necessary time to make the transition to other economic principles and priorities. In this context, I developed the National Action Plan 2023-2025, Aruba's transition to a sustainable and inclusive economic model for the diversification of our economy in a sustainable and inclusive way. The plan was presented to the Council of Ministers, was presented to Parliament, and has now been made available to the public. The execution of this plan can only be successful if all stakeholders work together, private and public. And it is therefore that I very much applaud the initiative taken by the organizers of this event to address these issues, which are mostly relevant at this time for Aruba. Wish you all the best in your deliberations, and I look very much forward to the outcome of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arleen. I'd like to just get into the meeting tonight. We haven't much time regarding the rest of Arleen and they are friends for almost 2 years. And know the following. She's the founder and president of in access. He's also the director for the president of the Economics of Mutuality. And he is facing over and the self-information that employees are challenging of reality of things that are not public, they are clear, that will impact the way we do business and also what kind of business that I found impact opportunities of the country. They also partner with the economic of the new world, making sure that those that are clear and and something that Arleen said today that I'm really listening to, I think what I want is ultimately to be and you will hear from a business as well. I think also to hear is the development the practical way because it could be an academic philosophy or ideology that is not an ideology. It is proven to work in business with win-win results for all the three. So with no more further ado, Dr. Arleen Westerhof.
You know what? I'm going to take the microphone. Lisette, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'd like to thank Lisette and Arleen Westerhof just for their initiatives and for the invitation. We are in the middle of a transition as a globe that has not seen the likes of the scope of the transition that we're in for at least 500 years. And that's a fact. This started long before COVID. COVID was a black swan event, but this started long before COVID. On October 31st, 2011, I read an article in my daily newspaper, NRC Handelsblad, in the Netherlands. And it was written by a Yale University professor who studies sociological change. And he was saying that humanity right now is at a global watershed moment. And a watershed moment is not a tipping point. It's more all-encompassing than that. A watershed, for example, is in the Alps. I live in Europe. So if you take the Alps, on one side of the Alps, the water will flow down to the Rhine River and through the Netherlands out to the Atlantic. On the other side, it flows to the Rhone River and it exits in the Mediterranean Sea. And that point where things change is called a watershed. And we as humanity are at such a watershed moment now. The thing that characterizes a watershed moment, the author was saying, was that often the people going through these watershed moments do not recognize that they are in them or the magnitude of the change that is upon them. And so 500 years ago, we had a watershed moment with the Protestant Reformation. It was interesting, between 1480 and 1520, society changed beyond recognition. And the author said that if you were to transport someone who lived in 1480, if you could have put them in a time capsule and transported them to 1520, they wouldn't have recognized the world. And they would have been very inept. Why? Because between 1480 and 1520, the Gutenberg printing press had been discovered. That was, let's just put it like this, social media of the time. You had Columbus, who had sailed and had realized that the world was not flat, but it was round. So worldviews were changing. You had an end to the dominance of the Catholic Church. And that had determined the way of life, at least in Europe, for several hundred years. And so as a result, those were massive changes. Another watershed moment took place between 1780 and 1860, the Industrial Revolution. Every watershed moment leads to massive disruption of social life. And in 1780, you had, for example, in Great Britain, 70% of the population living in rural areas. By 1860, 70% of the population lived in urban centers. And that's where you got Charles Dickens, for those of you who are familiar with British literature. That's where you had talk of the poorhouses, masses of people immigrating from the country to the city areas who did not yet have the skills to deal with the new realities in which they found themselves. And the author wrote that we are now in a tipping point, actually a watershed moment as a society that actually exceeds both of these previous watershed moments put together. And that's something that we need to be aware of. And as I said, this was pre-COVID already. So COVID was a hiccup in comparison to the watershed moment that we are in as a world. Why is the degree of change, scale of change, so incredibly high? There are a number of reasons. Number one, the geopolitical shifts that are happening are unparalleled. Things are moving from west to east. That's not a secret for many of us, but the thing is they are moving fast. And within a 50-year period between 1980 and 2030, much of these things will be accomplished. Second thing, technological change. In 1980, I don't even remember if we had the mobile phone or not. If we did, they were the big things that you needed to carry on your shoulder in a holster because they were that heavy, and only a handful of people had them. Now, none of us can imagine our lives without a mobile phone. I was in Mozambique 2 weeks ago, and we had zero coverage where I was. And a week without a mobile phone and mobile technology was a real readjustment. And so as a result, mobile technology has completely changed, not just the way we think, but the way we interact with each other, and also the way our societies function. We are living in the day and the age of social media, where our political processes and everything else now are on screen for the whole world to see. Another reason is economically or financial. I'll start first with financial. We are moving away from the dominance of the American dollar. And that's not just recently, but it was interesting. One of the starting shots that was fired, and I use the analogy now of warfare, marine warfare. Centuries ago, cannon, you fired a shot over the bow of a boat, was the establishment of the Asian International Investment Bank, AIIB. That was not reported widely in the West, but that was very significant. Why? Because that was China saying that we find that we're not going to accept the dominance of the US any longer. We are bigger. By 2026, China will be the largest economic power on the planet. All right. I'm not talking here good or bad. These are neutral statements. Obviously, you now have opposing worldviews: state-controlled capitalism or market capitalism. All right. And so you're getting those juxtaposition of ideas. That plus the move last week, Iran, South Africa, Brazil, China, and Russia saying, we will now officially adopt the Chinese yuan as the world currency, and we will gold back it. That was a significant move. And my banker friends in the US are very concerned. Now, so economies are shaking, things that we relied on for many, many decades. And so all of these things separately would have provoked a watershed moment, but together they are changing and have changed the way that society thinks, lives, works, communicates, relates to each other. That change will be done by 2030. And so when we say it's no longer business as usual, we really are meaning this. As I said, COVID was a blip compared to the shift that we're in right now. And so we need to be aware of the global context in which we find ourselves. Why the economics of mutuality? Simply because up until now, we have more or less been able to rely on an economic system that functioned primarily on one pillar, and that is the predominance of financial capitalism and maximizing that. However, now with the global shaking and shifting, we are going to have to concentrate on other forms of capital. Interestingly enough, that when Facebook bought PayPal a number of years ago, they paid 19 billion US dollars for a company that hadn't even made a profit yet. 19 billion US dollars. Why did they pay that much for something that was still making a loss? It's because they realized that there are other forms of capital that are now rising in importance. Our financial systems have switched. We have gone from, let's just put it like that, an agricultural system more than 100 years ago, where in that system, agricultural economy, if you had land, you were rich. We went to the industrial age, where if you had factories and means of production, you became rich. From the industrial age, we went to the service economy, where if you had a bank or insurance company, you were able to do very, very well. And now we have made the switch from the service economy to the digital economy. And that means now that something else is valuable. And that is that if you have information and access to a network of people, now is the time when you're going to be able to become rich and do well. And I can illustrate that also in another way too. What are some of the things that are helping to drive this and that are in our future, all of us globally? If you look at the market capitalization of the top 3 automobile makers in the United States in 1991, General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford, that was 14 billion US dollars. Together, those companies employed 1.2 million people. The market capitalization in 2014 of Google, Facebook, and Amazon, Google, Apple, and Amazon, pardon me, in 2014 was around the same. However, they only employed about 1,000 people. That's a tenth of what was employed in 1991. That's not that big a difference in time. The statistics from the World Economic Forum say that by 2050, 47% of the jobs that exist now in the United States will no longer exist. Why? Automation, digitization. Challenge means opportunity, but we have some big challenges ahead of us, which is why it is so incredibly important that as we look forward towards our economy, all of our economies, that we have to start to lean upon more than just one leg, financial capital. And we have to start now to acknowledge and to work with different forms of capital. In 2018, when we had our economic summit meeting in the Netherlands. The first day we had it at the Binnenhof, the Dutch Parliament buildings. The Dutch Minister of Finance opened the meeting. That was Wopke Hoekstra back then. And he said, as far as I am concerned, mutuality has to be a cornerstone of the Dutch economy in the coming years. And so as a result, mutuality, what I'm going to present to you tonight, that has resonated very strongly, not only with the Dutch government, but throughout Europe. Francois Macron is also using this. And why? It's because they're realizing that in order to withstand shocks, you're going to have to put your eggs in more than one basket. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight, economics of mutuality and how to future-proof your economies for nations. And so, and I've got another slide, and that is using purpose as a strategy. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Some of you who have heard me speak earlier, I'm going to fly through some of these slides. Economics of Mutuality originated in business with the question from the CEO of Mars in 2007, what is the right level of profit? Not how can we maximize profit, but what is the right level of profit? That is a question that was posed because Mars operates on a principle of mutuality since its founding. And so as a result, they operate and have actively been doing that for more than 80 years, looking at how can they benefit additional stakeholders than just the business, not a new concept. It's been around for a long time. A quote by King Solomon there on the screen, but even Paul Polman has said recently, time and time again, it has been proven generosity leads to benefiting not just those who you give to, but also yourself and society. And so our center at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, we started out looking exclusively at businesses, but now we're expanding that to look at how can you expand that whole concept of mutuality or reciprocity to be a guiding principle for all of society. And it has some advantages. Why? Because it talks about relational parity, meaning I relate to someone on an equal level as myself. If I look at Africa, a continent that we're busy with for a while now, you know what? They may be poor on financial capital, but they are very rich on relational capital. And one of the things that's coming out in research now is just like plants need healthy soil in which to thrive, businesses need healthy relational capital environments in which to thrive. And so it's important that we address these things. Why? Because financial capitalism worked well for a time. However, it has shown cracks. We are not anti-profit because businesses need profit to thrive. However, one of the things that a singular focus on profit has done is that it has caused a short-termism, which has caused CFOs and others who run our economies to have to make decisions for the short term that are actually eroding the ecosystems on which our very businesses are built. And so that's why this is no longer sustainable. There's a quote that has been made that I really appreciate, and that is, you cannot have a healthy economy or a healthy business with a sick society. And so our societies, the wealth gap between rich and poor is getting more pronounced. And that is never good for the democratic process in society. That wealth gap is leading to populism in all of our nations. And also it's leading to a destabilization of the economic crisis. Milton Friedman, we've been operating under that philosophy for the last number of years, sole social purpose of business to maximize profits. And so that was good for a while, as I mentioned, but there are some cracks in the system. I showed this yesterday. Yes, we destroyed the planet, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created value for the shareholders. And this afternoon, I asked people, you know, it's just, I said to the group this afternoon, there are very few opportunities that we ever get to make decisions that are going to be remembered in the next 50 years. This is one of those moments in time. And so, yes, there are threats, but there are also opportunities. And if we seize them. So this is an opportunity for business to change, business leaders, investors, management, etc., and to reposition the corporation positively in ways that reflect the changing needs of society and the planet, and also to reset business on the right bedrock foundation of practical application. The role of business is changing. Business can go where governments cannot. Multinationals operate in several nations. Governments are restricted to their own national boundaries, but they have a responsibility. We're now going to get to the economics of mutuality itself, which I haven't yet talked about in depth. What is it? For 2,000 years of economic history, all economies have been based on three things: the planet that provides the raw materials that people transform into value-added goods and services, and capital, actually. And capital, for centuries, the main source or the main function of that was to provide liquidity to the system, to make sure that the system kept moving. For actually millennia, capital wasn't accumulated to the same degree as we've been accumulating it now. And so the economics of mutuality is an attempt to get back to the foundations of what are companies and what's the purpose of the economy. Economics, the Latin word is oikos, and that actually just means the household. Economics were always rooted in families, in communities, in that relational unit. Copanis, the company, sharing of bread. All right. And so companies were meant to be places where people gathered, where people could receive dignity, and where people could also translate that outside of the company. Economics of mutuality recognizes and works with 4 different kinds of capital. We start with human capital. And all right, you can see that even though the line on the screen is through that right there. But human capital is measured through people's skills, experience, satisfaction of people on the work floor, individual health and well-being. I would even extend that to society. Notice Aruba's motto is one happy island. Yes, you have happy tourists, but also Arubans, one happy island, individual well-being, human capital. Social capital is the second one. That is extremely important in times in which massive change is occurring. And social capital is measured by the quality of the relationships between people. And a major breakthrough in social capital was discovered, at least research-wise, by discovering that only 3 factors could explain most of social capital and account for it in a society. Number 1 is trust. Do people trust us? And do people trust each other? Number 2 is cohesion. And I also say this a lot in my own nation, in societies in which people are afraid, COVID did not help this at all, in which people became more and more isolated from each other. We need things, we need policies and strategies that actually bring people together, also for business, instead of splitting them apart, social cohesion. And the third thing is the capacity for collective action. And that capacity is the ability of a group of people, business or society, to actually come together to accomplish something specific. And those three things alone explain 75% of social capital and can be utilized to improve all of those things in a society and in a business. Third form of capital is natural capital, in contrast to the donut economy, because my city, Amsterdam, has vowed to become and has signed a covenant to say we will be the first donut city in the world. Nice language, good for policymakers, but how do you measure it? We're having problems with measurement. And for business, you can't work with the donut economy, even though I know Kate Wayworth personally. And it's part of the same kind of thing. But the thing is, donut economics is more for policymakers and those who deal with scale, large things of scale. For business people, you need to break it down a lot more concretely. And so, yeah, natural capital here. We're not talking now about the externalities, the CO2 thing, or the nitrogen stuff, the stickstoff crisis. That's a hot topic right now for us. But what you are talking about with natural capital is that businesses and institutions try to operate resource efficient. So you're looking at the input streams here and not the output streams. An example in business, and this can also lead to innovation in business. One of the case studies for Economics of Mutuality, because this is not just theory, it's tried, it's been practiced, is, for example, one of the Mars divisions makes coffee capsules, you know, the things in the metal kind of containers. It makes a perfect cup of coffee every time. All right. They were looking at that as a business unit. This is a natural capital case study. And when they analyzed what was the pain point, the weak point in that particular process, it was the fact that for every cup of coffee, every single capsule that was processed, 3.4 liters of water was actually polluted in order to get one singular thing. Now, usually in our accounting, we wouldn't take into consideration that. You take into consideration profit and loss from sales. However, they decided that they're going to have to pay now. That's what the company decided. We're going to pay to clean up that 3.4 liters of water. That was an expense, a major expense. And all of a sudden, it became a priority for that business unit to innovate, to find a way to use less water to make those coffee capsules. So what did they do? They spent money on R&D, which they treated not as an expense, but as an investment. Using economics of mutuality, sometimes the things that you're trying to solve will actually lead to investment and innovation. And what happened? Through the course of a year and a half, they were able to develop a new sort of coffee capsule that only required using 0.8 liters of water instead of 3.4. That means that they eliminated 3/4 of the volume of water that they needed, which is a significant savings. And it was good for the environment. And that's something, however, the internal stuff that you can do something about as a company. That's a concrete example of a natural capital kind of thing. A second concrete example of using natural capital is for example, cocoa production across the world, riddled with child labor, riddled with the fact and very bad reputation because of the fact that cocoa farmers are paid so very, very little. South America, for example, cocoa farmers were paid so little that many of them switched to growing an alternative crop, which is highly illegal, but which paid them enough to be able to put food on the table for their families. And so that was a pain point for all of the chocolate companies. Why? Because they needed to think about, are we going to be able to ensure our supply of cocoa for the future? And so what did they do? They took a look at this pain point and they said, we need to do something about it. What did they do? They actually started to pay the cocoa farmers more, a living wage. And they solved their pain point. The cocoa farmers didn't have to switch to the alternative crop in order to feed their families. And I'm not saying that it solved every problem, but it solved a major problem. All right, 2 examples of natural capital, which also the cocoa illustration is also a social capital thing. Why? Because it benefited the communities that the farmers were in. And shared financial capital, what does that mean? That means that actually, as you operate in this way, you take into account from the very core, you integrate more stakeholders into your business model at the very core of it. And so it's not CSR, which is you operate to maximize profit for the shareholders. And then if you have enough over at the end, you do something good with it. It's not corporate philanthropy, which is the same. And it's not a triple or even quadruple bottom line. Because none of those 3 approaches actually changes at its heart the way that business is done. An important thing to mention with regards to these 4 capitals that Economics of Mutuality works with is that we are not talking about a siloed approach to things. That means it's not just people first. Sounds good, but it hasn't been shown to work in the past. Communism, socialism, people first, at the expense of capital and at the expense of the environment. It's not just natural capital first, the green movement. In the green movement, it's just that's at the expense of people and at the expense of capital. And it's certainly not financial capitalism in its current form, where that is maximized to the expense of everything else. All right. So it is an integrated, holistic approach that we are looking at. And these things are not just ideological, they can be measured, all right, in business, and they can be acted upon in business. Yesterday, I spoke a little bit, and I will return to that. There are many, many examples, but I'm limiting myself to a couple because they show certain things. We talked yesterday, for those who were here yesterday, about a Norwegian company called NG, Norgesgjenvinning, so NG, right there. What does Norway have to do with Aruba? This was a waste management company. Waste management is present in every society. In 2012, they got a new CEO. This CEO looked at the business that he was leading. It was specifically Norwegian. It was one of the several. And what did they do, this company? They picked up waste and they took it to landfills. Not a sexy job, all right? But this CEO had vision, and he also had a conviction, because he looked at the industry and he said, the future, as far as I'm concerned, is in recycling for our industry. He looked and he saw something that they were not yet busy with: innovation. And so he said, I realized at a certain point in time that our industry held the key to climate change, but also to recycling and ensuring a supply of metals, heavy metals and otherwise, because they picked up a lot of metallic objects. And so he said, I was wondering whether or not that could lead to an entirely new aspect of the business that we were not busy with. Anyway, he started to ride in the trucks. This is how it works in practice. He started to ride in the trucks, talk to the people, and he realized that even though many of his employees were honest, the industry itself was not quite so honest as they were projecting. Corruption is everywhere. And so as a result, a number of practices were being done, not only by his company, but by others that were actually illegal. For example, they were knowingly labeling toxic waste, in many cases, as normal waste in order to save money on the disposal. Number two, they were disposing of things in the city grid without declaring it to save money. Number three, some of his own managers were fudging the books in order to improve quarterly results. And when he confronted them on this, the answer was, everybody else is doing it. The answer was, we've always done it this way. The answer was, if we do it the way that the regulations say that we're supposed to, and it's only a few dumb people in Oslo who don't know the reality, who say that it should be done that way, literally this was what he encountered, then we'll never make money. The business will go under. That was the prevailing sentiment at the time. What do you do when your company is in an industry where there are prevailing mindsets that are in contradiction to what they should be? Well, what this gentleman did, it's a real life story, is he, number one, he said to his entire organization, starting with upper management, we are going to adhere to the rules of the game. And he said, you've got a grace period, but everybody needed to sign a covenant to say that they would do that. And he said, within 6 months, we're going to go to a zero tolerance regime. What was the result of that? 30 out of his 70 senior managers resigned. Crisis, but also opportunity, which we'll talk about. Another thing that he did was that he also said he actually started aggressively recruiting people with other skills. Why? Because he said we need innovation. He set a new vision and purpose for the company. We are not just a waste management company, and that's where we kind of start to mesh and dovetail into using purpose as a strategy. But he said we are an international recycling corporation. New vision for the company, new scope. And so he started to recruit aggressively people who had no background in waste management, but had skills and the passion to make the company or take the company in the direction of the vision. Number three, what he did was he blew the whistle on his own company as leader. He came out in the press and he said, this is what we have been doing against regulations. Brave step. Not everybody in this company was happy. And certainly not everybody in the industry was happy with him. The industry association threatened to kick him out with company. Why? Because in blowing the whistle on his own company, he was blowing the whistle on the entire industry. And he got personal threats. It was a personal cost to him from the organized crime. It was profiting from the situation as it was. It costs to do the right thing and to also be visionary for the future. It does pay in the end, but it does cost also too. So I'm not here to tell you that this is going to be, these transitions are easy and they're not going to cost you anything. The experience, however, experience in business plus research, however, shows that after that dip, you get companies that outperform, companies that just work on the basis of profit maximization for a number of reasons. Anyway, he persisted with this, and he got a group of employees who believed in the purpose. You need a purpose that is meaningful in order to take your company through the transition of changing markets. He knew that they could not stay where they were. He knew they had to move as a company. And so he was the first in the industry to see where they needed to go. And so as a result, you know, it's just the people, because they were in it, because they could see what they were in it for, something bigger than themselves, they stayed on board. Financially, the first year, with the new investments that they needed to make, it cost them 40% of their operating budget before taxes. That was the first year. However, they did invest by buying the very first machine that was able to separate metals and waste using lasers. It was very efficient. And then the next year, they doubled the capacity of that machine. What happened? They became the very best in what they did. By year 4, they were making profits, solid profits. But by year 4, they were also searching for more waste because they were processing it a lot faster than they could. And so they also had to innovate on the logistics for how they collected waste. And they started to go to other Scandinavian nations, say, do you have waste? We will collect your waste. So all of a sudden they're going from a Norwegian company to a regional Scandinavian company. And these days, as of 2018 to now, NG has now become not only the biggest waste management and recycling company in the world, but the leading and biggest and most innovative in Scandinavia, but in the world now. And that came through one man who saw that the industry as it was coming to an end. It was going to have some serious repercussions, and he had the vision to do something about it. That is how these things work. But what was the first step in all of this? He had to develop a purpose. This graph right here is something that's saying that in 1994, you know, it was just the yellow line is corporate or organizational purpose, and the gray line is sustainability. 1994, you had purpose. People are a bit interested. Sustainability, not really. But after about 2008 financial crisis, sustainability concerns went way up, and with that, also purpose. All right, and so purpose is something that is on the agenda. What does this graph say on the left? Percentage of CEOs who said, you know, that things were important to them, an organization with a shared purpose, 89%. I'm more likely to recommend a company with a strong purpose to others, 85%. You can read the rest. But on the right side, the gray, this is what actually happens. So we're calling it purpose washing. We're not walking the talk. Economics of Mutuality is not just about having a purpose. It's about something more important. And that is about helping companies to realize the purpose that they have set for themselves. Because there are a lot of things that have purpose, but even my center, Rotterdam Center for Economics Mutuality, when I was searching the Netherlands, looking for case studies of companies that were actually walking the talk, the number is very low. And I had to eliminate some very large players who talked the talk, but didn't walk the talk. I'm not going to name them because I was really surprised and shocked. All right. A case study. This is Novo Nordisk. I've done it again. There are others, but it's nice way to say. A pharmaceutical company, they decided they wanted to change their image. They needed to change how they were doing business. They chose a purpose, a meaningful purpose, eradicating diabetes. And that, what they did was, instead of putting the purpose of the company, instead of putting the company in the middle, they organized their ecosystem around the purpose, which led to an extended ecosystem. They actually became very relational too. Why? Because they actually had to go out and talk to the members of their ecosystem. That also is something that makes businesses more relational. Now, as a multinational, they have departments that do that. But the thing is, within our center also too, one of the things we'd like to set up and are busy doing is just helping businesses by coming alongside and doing that footwork for them on that end. What did they do? They, come on, and we are stuck again. Okay, and I see that my battery is almost empty, so I am going to get the plug. But what did they do? I don't even need the slides for this. So I'm going to ask you to plug it in, because I'm not going to talk so much about Novo Nordisk. But what did they do? They developed a purpose which was meaningful, eradicating diabetes. Thank you, my dear. And going that way, they introduced a... Should companies simply not care at all about providing their employees with a sense of purpose? That goes too far. They should consider purpose, but probably not in the form of the lofty goals that they often articulate in their mission statements, which is very, very true. Instead, academic research suggests that employees thrive on local meaning. When you're talking about purpose statements, make it real and make it achievable so that your employees even understand it. Because most times it's not just the employees that don't understand, it's also the managers that don't understand. And so there are levels and different types of purpose statements that you can look at. Why do you need a purpose statement? Once again, in order to go through the discomfort of transition, and we're all going through that right now, you have to have employees that know why they're doing what they're doing. And so Economics of Mutuality transforms the purpose of business from simply maximizing profit for the shareholders to solving meaningful challenges for people and planet profitably. Okay, that's what we're looking at. Good for society, good for business. And so there you've got that articulated even a bit more. And this is one example of that. You can have different purposes for different divisions of a company. MWC is Mars Wrigley Corporation. Okay, so the chewing gum section. All right, the business unit purpose. That is thriving futures for cocoa farming families. Mars Wrigley, the chocolate bars, the chewing gum, etc. All right. And so that's the business unit purpose. But there's also a segment purpose that was adopted there. Better moments make the world smile. All right. And then you have the corporate purpose, the world we want tomorrow. That's a good one for what we're talking about here. Starts with how we do business today. Lisette.